Listen, I'm tired of the narrative that Gohan failed twice. I'm tired of hearing it. I'm tired of hearing that Gohan failed against Cell. I'm tired of hearing that Gohan failed against Buu. I'm tired of hearing of all these things. The disrespect will not be taken anymore. And why? Because Gohan is a name etched into the Dragon Ball legend. He is in the Mount Rushmore of anime, of television, and of personas. He is synonymous with latent power bordering on the divine. Twice, not once, but twice has his strength ascended beyond all known limits, eclipsing even his own father, Goku, and the searing image of the Super Saiyan 2 transformation born from righteous fury, the serene and unshakable confidence of the ultimate warrior confronting pure annihilation and the death of his family, the death of his friends, and the death of the world. These moments define Gohan's peak. So I'm tired of hearing all of these things, and I will explain why. Because alongside the legacy of power lingers the shadow of profound failure. So I agree, there is failure in Gohan, but it's not because he failed in the most common way that we know. Oh, he was arrogant. Oh, he was this. Oh, he could have killed Cell, but he just wanted to toy with him. No, everything that you've learned from Gohan is false. Everything that you have seen from Gohan is not to be taken at face value. So the two moments where absolute victory seemed assured only dissolved into catastrophe. And the Cell game's conclusion, forever marked by Goku's sacrifice, and the desperate attempt and the desperate battle against Super Buu culminated into Gohan's absorption. Yes, those were not his best moments, but the common narrative crystallizes around those simple verdicts. Arrogance took hold. He choked under pressure. These convenient labels are seemingly inexplicable lapses from the universe's strongest warrior. In both times, he was the strongest warrior. And in both times, we thought Gohan had fulfilled his prophecy. But no, there is something much deeper there that we need to unravel. So this analysis will move beyond such surface assessments. This will follow into a psychological deep dive and a case for understanding the intricate, often agonizing forces at play within Gohan. It posits that his critical failures were not born of simple character flaws, but were manifestations of a fundamental internal conflict. There was a deep schism between his innate Saiyan capabilities and his cultivated human values, nature versus nurture. So this exploration will shed light on how specific, overwhelming pressures, and specifically the psychological trauma inflicted during the Cell games and the cognitive dissonance experienced against Buu precipitated massive, and critical failures. And yes, there were failures, guys. I'm reiterating this, but they were not surface level failures. They were not as simple as we think they are. They were not mere mistakes. They were complex psychological breakdowns under duress, revealing the profound struggle of a divided self burdened by power it never truly sought. So to understand Gohan's critical failures, we must first grasp the fundamental duality at his core. From his earliest years, he was presented with a nature distinct from his Saiyan lineage. He was distinct from his father, and one can argue was closer to how his mother was. And he didn't resonate with his father as much, yet he loved him, he looked up to him, he was impressed by him, and he wanted to surpass him. However, little did we know, and little did his father know, that he didn't thrive for mayhem just as his father did. And he was influenced heavily by his mother. He was predisposed towards scholarship, forced into schooling. He possessed a gentle soul and a gentle spirit that recoiled from conflict. He didn't want to go heads on towards conflict. He wanted to run away from it. Yet, dormant within him lay an immense latent power and a direct inheritance from his father. And his father was one and only Goku, and the Saiyan potential was dwarfed nearly all other personas of Gohan. And this is one of the best example we can see in probably TV history about nature versus nurture. And this inherent contradiction was violently thrust into the open by circumstance. His childhood was not one of peaceful study. Definitely not. I wouldn't once wish this childhood on no one should, at 3 years old, should see his father die. No one at 4 years old should go into the wilderness and fight dinosaurs on his own. But a crucible forged, he was just a small child forged by conflict. And the arrival of Raditz, the training under Piccolo, and the battles against Vegeta and Nappa on Earth, the desperate fight for survival on Namek, these were not chosen by Gohan. They were forced upon him, and there were necessities that he had to face head on. So each event inflicted significant early trauma, searing the realities of life or death. And it was a combat that his psyche child was not prepared for. And Piccolo's mentorship was very, very important. One could say it was crucial, and especially crucial for his survival. But this further complicated this internal landscape that he had. He instilled discipline, and he honed Gohan's fighting instinct. So that bridged the gap between a helpless child and a capable warrior. However, this mentorship intrinsically fostered a path centered on combat, a destiny Gohan never wanted. Thus, right here, the stage is set with the core internal conflict. Gohan possesses God-tier power and the Saiyan fighting instincts that he rarely wants to utilize unless it is for sparring or for fun or to beat criminals. But these personas clash perpetually with his conscious desire for a peaceful and intellectual life. This unresolved tension, this war within himself, forms the bedrock of the psychological vulnerabilities that will later manifest under extreme pressures that we know as the fight against Buu and the fight against Cell. So let's go over failure number 1. The main theme of the Cell games is trauma and power unleashed. And the Cell games represent the first catastrophic eruption of Gohan's internal conflict. He was thrust into the arena against his own will, carrying the weight of the world and his father's seemingly inexplicable fate, and the pressure was immense. Gohan did not want to fight Cell. Gohan thought Goku was going to beat him. He went and trained with Goku because he was his dad and he liked it. But he never thought that Gohan was not able to defeat him. He never thought that Vegeta would not be able to defeat him. He just thought that he was going to be there, and who knows, maybe he has to fight, but he won't be the deciding factor in the fight. Yet, it was not the pressure alone that broke him, but it was a specific, devastating trigger. And it was one of the most famous, one of the most beautiful, and one of the most powerful scenes a human can witness with his own eyes on television. This was the destruction of Android 16. An automation, an AI, a robot who had shown Gohan unexpected kindness and an articulated defense of life, and that served as the catalyst. The gentle Gohan, for him, this was not merely a destruction of an ally. It was a profound traumatic event, a senseless act of cruelty that shattered his emotional restraints, and that was misunderstood by his dad and by Piccolo. We thought that finally Gohan had reached his full potential, but no, he only broke barrier number 1. And the result of this was the legendary transformation of Super Saiyan 2. And it was beautiful. It was wholesome to see with tears down his eyes. It was finally a moment that we've all waited for all this time in Dragon Ball Z and in Dragon Ball. However, Gohan had not yet fulfilled his prophecy. This power was not born of control or discipline. It was purely an eruption, fueled entirely by unrestrained rage. And it is here, and right here, where we observe the first psychological breakdown, understandable through specific theoretical lenses. And this theoretical lens is the one of psychology. And this, what theoretical lens will explain this is the theory of trauma-induced aggression and power intoxication. And psychological principles recognize that profound traumatic experiences, especially in youth, and doesn't get much younger than Gohan, can trigger intense, sometimes uncharacteristic aggressive responses. And this isn't necessarily cruelty. It can actually be fueled for good, but it is a reaction to overwhelming pain and helplessness. And separately, the concept of power intoxication describes how a sudden, dramatic increase in personal power can impair judgment and foster feelings of invincibility and inflate the ego, leading to a risky, irrational behavior. This theory is well understood and well portrayed by Vegeta when he becomes Super Vegeta, when he becomes Vegeta Blue, and when he becomes Majin. All of this, it is really encompassed by Vegeta during those times. And this association with Gohan is the fact that the destruction of Android 16 served as the acute trauma. Gohan's subsequent desire to make Cell suffer, to make the Cell Jr. suffer for all the pains they cause and for all the pain that Cell caused, absorbs one of the androids, the terror, the fear, the psychological trauma that he induced upon everyone, the killing of Trunks, the killing of Tien, killing quote unquote. That was all fueled by an immediate resolution that aligns with a trauma-induced aggressive reaction, lashing out at the source of his pain, and simultaneously the unprecedented surge to Super Saiyan 2 induced this so-called power intoxication. And this combination explains the dialogue, "I'm going to make you suffer, Cell." This is what he said to Cell. He said he didn't want to kill him. He'll make him suffer. He made him become Cell's second form. He humiliated Cell, who was supposed to be perfect, one-shotted the Cell Juniors, and his taunts about Cell inadequacy and his brutal, punishing fighting style made him feel invincible, and he prioritized inflicting pain on Cell over neutralizing the threat. And this was a direct result of the trauma fueling the intoxication from his power. We can associate this with impaired executive function, especially under extreme emotional states. Executive functions in humans, and we can say in Saiyans as well, since he's half human, are the brain's higher level cognitive processes responsible for planning, reasoning, impulse control, emotional regulation, and decision making. Crucially, these functions can become significantly impaired or even put offline on the condition of extreme emotional duress, such as intense rage or intense terror. And then the overwhelming rage that Gohan experience was precisely such an extreme emotional state. This impaired his executive functions. It shut down his capacity for irrational planning and impulse control. He was no longer there anymore. And the starkest evidence of this is his complete disregard of his father that he looked up to, that he loved, that he cared for, that wanted to be like him. He didn't care about Goku's pleas to finish Cell off. He did not care about Gohan telling him this. He did not care about his best friend Trunks telling him this. He was not there anymore. He was psychologically and physiologically incapable of regulating this impulse to punish, and he demonstrated a clear breakdown in executive control driven by the emotional overload he was feeling. And all of this, guys, is a stark manifestation of Gohan's internal conflict that we introduced in the beginning. His Saiyan nature, the raw power of aggression, exploded forth destructively and entirely overwhelmed his nervous system and his human personality and his moral compass. It was power that was untethered from his usual control. Gohan had bursts of God tier power, but it was never to the point where it took over his body and took control of his persona. Yes, sometimes he acted on impulses like any human, and especially a half-breed Saiyan. But the outcome was tragically direct this time. The delay, born from psychological collapse, afforded Cell the opportunity to initiate his self-destruction. When he was second form, he said, "You little insect," to Gohan. And he said, "Enough of this, he's gonna explode." And that forced Goku's sacrifice. So Gohan's first great failure was not simple arrogance, guys, like we understand initially when we see it. But it was the consequences of trauma overwhelming his underdeveloped coping mechanism for such immense power and volatile emotions. So I want to take the blame off of Gohan for a bit and explain away that, yes, it was physically Gohan there, but at the same time, it wasn't really him. No one recognized him. Goku did not recognize him. He never showed such arrogance. He had never shown such disdain from listening to his father, for disdain for another person. He warned Cell multiple times. Gohan was at his true self when he was a Super Saiyan 1. But as a Super Saiyan 2, when he finally had a taste of the power, it took over and overwhelmed his nervous system, and he was not present anymore. This is why we can take the blame off of Gohan, and we can say this failure was not his fault, and even worse, it cascaded into something that he will forever remember and regret. I'm saying this because years later, he was facing the existential threat of Super Buu. Gohan returned seemingly transformed, and the Elder Kai had unlocked his potential, and we thought that yet again Gohan was going his own path, and he was finally again the strongest warrior in the universe. He had immense strength, and apparently it was integrated without the prerequisite of rage that he had against Cell. And his initial confrontation with Buu, he was radiating with confidence, smiling and control, easily dodging and countering Super Buu. He was completely in control. This is what we think. However, his declaration upon arrival said to Buu was, "Fight you? No, I want to kill you." And guys, you know they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, sometimes 2 sentences are worth 1,000 words, because this statement is very crucial. When you analyze this psychologically, it represents Gohan's consciously attempting to adopt a mindset that he now understood was necessary. He learned from his mistakes against Cell, and he was directly learning from the catastrophic hesitation he had against Cell. He intellectually recognized, because Gohan is a scholar and is the smartest fighter there, and he recognized the need for the decisive lethal action. And this was Gohan trying to fake it till he made it. But however, this forced resolve soon revealed its fragility, leading the second psychological breakdown that Gohan encountered. His apparent confidence masked an underlying psychological vulnerability, best understood through the lens of cognitive dissonance and the resulting behavioral adaptations. So simply, guys, I think we all know what cognitive dissonance is, but this describes a significant mental discomfort experienced when an individual holds two or more contradictory beliefs, or two or more contradictory values, or even attitudes, or is confident with information that conflict with his existing cognitions. And to reduce this uncomfortable dissonance, individuals are motivated to change conflicting elements or rationalize their behavior. So you might ask, how can we associate this with Gohan? How did Gohan suffer from cognitive dissonance while he was fighting Buu? He seemed so in control. He seemed so confident. He was radiant. He was looking good. He was beef. He was piecing Super Buu up. Well, upon facing Buu, Gohan experienced his dissonance. And how did he experience his dissonance? He held cognition 1, based on past experiences, mainly Cell, and the current threat. I must kill Buu swiftly and decisively. But this conflicted directly with cognition 2. My core nature finds killing abhorrent, and a controlled dominance feels more aligned with my values. I don't want to kill. I just like sparring. I like fighting. I like beating people up for fun, but I don't want to kill. So he was holding these simultaneously, and this created a significant psychological tension. His statement, I want to kill you, was an attempt to verbally align with cognition 1 and go straight away from cognition 2. So this leads us into the behavioral compromise and the superficial resolve. When faced with cognitive dissonance that cannot be easily resolved by changing core beliefs, individual may adapt a behavioral compromise. And these are actions that attempt to partially satisfy both conflicting cognitions simultaneously. Superficial resolve refers to a stated intention or outward display of determination that isn't deeply or yet integrated with the individual's core personality or instincts, making it potentially fragile under pressure. So Gohan's actions following his declarations of fight you, no, I want to kill you, exemplify the behavioral compromise. And this was aimed at reducing the cognitive dissonance he was feeling at the time. Instead of immediate annihilations, which fully aligns with cognition number 1, he engaged in a prolonged demonstration of dominance, partially satisfying cognition number 1 because he will still defeat Buu, but he will not annihilate him and humiliate him. While feeling closer to cognition number 2, preference for controlled fighting. So this reveals the superficial resolve that he had. The killer instinct was a conscious overlay. It was not yet instinctual because he had just adopted this fake it till you make it mindset. The evidence is the extending beating and lecturing of Buu without finishing the blow. You would think that he would have learned from Cell, and yet he did. He did in some way. He learned from his mistakes, but he faced a new psychological challenge, and this delay was the compromise born from his internal conflict. It was into the window created by his psychological vulnerability and behavioral delay that Buu struck a nerve. Facing defeat, Buu sensed Gohan far and far away. He had concocted a plan. He was going to be defeated by Gotenks Super Saiyan 3. Gotenks even said, it's time to finish him off now. It's time. But he ran out of time. Gohan played around too much. And we cannot blame Gotenks, blame him or them. They're kids. So we can understand this. They finally had this Super Saiyan strength. They were unbeatable. And they had this arrogance within them. And Gotenks was about to finish Buu off once and for all. However, Buu sensed Gotenks' fusion times was short, and Buu, despite everything we think of him, demonstrated desperate ingenuity. And using this precious time that Gohan provided to Buu, he gave Buu the opportunity. Buu detaches a piece of himself, setting an absorption trap. He absorbs Gotenks and Piccolo. And this is where the tides completely turn. And then Buu's plan here stemmed from observation and desperation for power, hinged entirely on the opportunity that Gohan's hesitation created. And this was the impaired executive function and the cognitive overload and the emotional shock. Similar to the impairment he was feeling under extreme emotion, these executive functions can also be severely disrupted by cognitive overload. You know, guys, when we go to, like, a small example is when we go to a store and you go to your favorite store and there's just too many to choose from. You don't know what to choose. You're like, oh my God, this is way too much information. I wish someone could just pick for me. Well, it's the same thing here. When the brain receives too much critical information or too many demanding stimuli, simultaneously hindering its ability to process information efficiently, this intense emotional shock, like unexpected trauma or grief, can cause a temporary shutdown of the processes and freezing the cognitive process of the brain. So Gohan, after he saw the absorption of his brother and his mentor, his best friend, his uncle, this delivered a massive emotional shock that cannot be denied. And this struck Gohan on his core, and he was still this fragile person that he was while he was fighting Cell. This event created extreme cognitive overload. He had to process the emotional trauma and the sudden drastic increase in Buu's power and tactical capability. He officially became Buu-Tenks, possessing Gotenks' power and Piccolo's intelligence. It was over. It was over. And then Goku came with a sudden appearance with the Potara fusion. This confluence of factors completely overwhelmed Gohan. He was not able to process. Thanks to Dende, he was still able to stay alive, but this led to the impaired executive function. This result was a visible decision paralysis, freezing and failing to react defensively or secure the Potara earrings, looking utterly overwhelmed in the face of the appearance of his dad, of the new solution of the emotional trauma of his brother being absorbed, the emotional trauma of his mentor being absorbed, and the emotional trauma and the humiliation of the failure that he yet again made the same mistakes against Buu. So ultimately, this failure traces back to the internal conflict. Buu's successful maneuver, enabled by Gohan's delay and the subsequent targeted psychological assaults, shattered the fragile fake warrior resolve by striking Gohan's genuine human attachment. The killer instinct Gohan attempted to project proved insufficient. It was not mature yet enough. He was not ripe enough. It was integrated when his core values were attacked. This led to paralysis and defeat and absorption. Therefore, this leads to a unifying tragedy. Weaving these threads together reveals a narrative that is unionized. Gohan's two most notorious failures, despite their different circumstances, stem from the same fundamental root. And this is the unresolved, deeply ingrained internal conflict between his immense Saiyan power and his developed human personality and values. Nature versus nurture. And this conflict rendered him psychologically vulnerable when wielding supreme power under duress. The triggers differed, initiating distinct pathways to failure. Against Cell, it was trauma and unrestrained rage, and this overwhelmed his executive functions, leading to impulsive delay. Against Buu, it was cognitive dissonance and targeted manipulation, and has overwhelmed his executive functions again, resulting in hesitation and paralysis. Yet, the underlying mechanism, the breakdown of higher cognitive process under extreme psychological stress to his divided self, remained consistent in both cases. So acknowledging this context elevates the analysis beyond simplistic claims of arrogance, simplistic claims of just fumbling the bag. While confidence was undoubtedly a factor, particularly against Buu when he thought that Gohan finally learned from his mistakes, the underlying psychological mechanism provide a far richer, more complex, and ultimately a more tragic and sad explanation. Gohan lacked the crucial psychological integration, the seamless fusion of his power and personality required to effectively command his ultimate strength decisively amidst the chaotic pressures of mortal combat. His failures were not tactical errors, they were not arrogance, they were not him just toying with his food, but they were symptoms of a profound internal struggle. Thus, the psychological evidence concludes this case. The examination of Gohan's defining failures reveals a narrative far richer and considerably more tragic than simple arrogance or battlefield missteps allow. What stands unveiled is the consistent impact of his core internal conflict, the scholar wrestling with the warrior, the gentle soul resisting the Saiyan imperative. Against Cell, we identified how profound psychological trauma short-circuited his newfound power. Rage born of pain fueled the trauma-induced aggression and power intoxication that overwhelmed his adolescent executive function. He was just a teenager, guys, and this resulted in impulsive retribution and fatal delay. His Saiyan nature erupted, gave him this unique power, but it was untempered and it was destructive. Against Buu, the challenge shifted, facing annihilation and the end of the world again. Gohan attempted a conscious adoption of the required ruthlessness that he saw within Goku and Vegeta. Yet, the analysis exposed the crippling cognitive dissonance this created. The chasm between rational necessity and his core aversion to killing. The dissonance manifested as a behavioral compromise, a demonstration of dominance substituting for immediate decisive action, and a fragile resolve ultimately shattered by Buu's psychological and astute manipulation, likely informed by Piccolo's absorption. He targeted Gohan's deepest attachments. We can see it that when Buu was born, what is one of the things he said to Gohan? He spoke as Gotenks with the challenges of Piccolo, knowing Gohan's weaknesses. He said with Gotenks' voice, "Gohan, why did you let Buu absorb me? Why did you fail again?" And the resulting cognitive overload and emotional shock induced paralysis proved that the Saiyan persona was merely a veneer over his fundamental nature. In both instances, the failure stemmed not from a lack of power. That's not what was missing in Gohan. We always knew that he was very strong, but it was from lack of a psychological integration necessary to finally wield that power effectively under extreme and targeted stress when it matters most. Gohan's ultimate story during this era therefore transcends just a simple arc of potential realized or squandered. It becomes a compelling study of the psychological weight of immense power borne by an individual lacking the inherent disposition for it. His struggles, his vulnerabilities, his very failures, they solidify this position not merely as a powerful fighter, but as one of Dragon Ball's most complex and resonant and tragically human figures. He embodied the often unsealed battle within, the struggle to reconcile who we are with what circumstance demands. And yet, perhaps this very struggle, these painful trials and tribulations were necessary for eventually the latent promise will find its expression. Years later, facing a new threat, demanding his utmost, with no one there to save him, with no Goku, with no Vegeta, with only Gotenks and Piccolo, similar to how it was against Buu, Gohan would finally unlock a power born not just of rage or calculation, but seemingly of a honed instinct and protective resolve. The emergence of Beast Gohan signifies a culmination in a different kind of ascension. Through enduring his past, the prophecy was finally fulfilled. The gentle scholar, burdened by his power, finally stood as the strongest warrior in the universe, and he was finally unleashed.